All right, guys. So let's try to understand what is a state variable again. So when we talk about state variable is a normal variable, but the difference is that whenever you increase a state variable, let us say count, or decrease a state variable. So for example, if I change the value of my state variable from 0 to 1, or I decrease the state variable from 0 to -1, then whatever the change I'm doing here will get reflected down below. So the value will become -1 if I decrease the value by -1, or it will become 1 if I increase the value by 1. And it will also be reflected in the browser, which means the UI of my component every time updates whenever I change a state variable. So let us try to understand it further with an actual example by creating a state variable. So there are a couple of rules to create a state variable. First thing is that we need to import a special function called useState from React. Now let's understand what is this line. Well, import useState, but this useState should be inside curly braces. Curly braces means I'm using named export, which means the name should be the same as it is available inside the React library. We will understand about named and default exports a little later, but as of now, understand that we need to put a curly brace around useState because it is a named export. Next thing, this useState variable actually returns me an array. So I'll write return value equal to useState, and inside this useState, I can define one state variable. So I can define a state variable, and let us give the value as 10. So what this means is that I'm creating a state variable with the initial value which I'm passing to the useState function, and it returns me an array. So the question is, what is the return value of this useState function? So the return value of the useState function is actually an array, which means this useState function returns me first the state variable, and second, it returns me the function. We can call it as set function. Set function, which is the function used to modify the state variable. You cannot modify the state variable straightforward. You need a function to change that variable, and this is the actual variable. So this is an array. We can verify it also. How we can verify? Very simple. Let me just go back, and write here console.log of return value to verify what is the return value of the useState function. Save it, and let's again try to see the output in the browser. So I'm just going to open my application homepage. Okay, I believe I need to start the application. So let me start the application. So meanwhile, my application starts, let me again try to explain. So what we are trying to do here is that we are calling the useState with the default value inside the useState function, and this returns me an array. The first is the variable, state variable itself, like the count we did in the previous example. And second is the function that will be used to modify the state. All right. So let me try to write some bit of code here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first get the function, or we can even do something like that. Let count equal to return value of 0, which means it will return me the variable, which is the state variable. Second, I will write set count. I can give it any value. I'm just giving it set count, which is the second value of the return array, which gives me the function to modify the state variable. Remember, I can't modify the state variable directly. I need a function to do that. Right? Save it. And let me now try to print the values here. I'm going to write a h3 tag. And here I'm going to write count or state variable count equal to count. Close the heading tag. Next line. I'm going to, okay, let's try only this one first. Save it. And let us see if we are able to get down. All right, we have small problem here. So the problem is I started with h3 tag, so I should have closed it with h3 tag. That's a small error, and it's working fine, right? Let me clear the drawing. So we understand that now I have got my state variable with the initial value as 10. Next thing, let me add a button to increase the value. Increase. Right? So I'll also need to write a function here. Increase. And how do I modify the value? I will write set count. And inside that, I will write count plus 1, which means I have to pass the modified value, which I want to change inside this function. And the value of the state variable will change. So here I'm going to write on click equal to name of the function, which is increase. Save it. And let us see if my application works. Now, the moment I click on the increase, wow, you can see that the UI is getting refreshed. This is what is a state variable, which means the moment I change a state variable, the UI refreshes. Clear? Now the next thing, let me just again start the application and open my, console. Why? Because I wanted to show you the return value. And you can see here, this is the return value, which is, this console.log. So if I do open the terminal, and go to console, you can see here, I'm talking about this return value, which is here. And let me now just see what it returns. It returns an array as we discussed, the first value being the state variable itself, correct? And the second value, you see, is a function. So let me just enlarge it a bit for you, so you would be able to see it clearly. So the first value, so the first value is the count value, and the second is a function, right? So this is what I was trying to tell you, that this useState returns an array, the first being the value of the variable, and second being the function by which we can modify the value. Now we understand this. The next thing, we can, complete our application, decrease, and again set count minus 1. And now if I just add one more button, and this button is going to just point to decrease function. And write a decrease here. All right. Let us now see the output. So let me just again revise for you. useState returns an array, the first being the value of the state variable, first index, second index being the function by which you can increase or decrease the value. Right? Let us try to see if we can get this output. And now, if I increase, you can see it's increasing. If I decrease, you can see it's wonderful. So that is how a state variable works. Now, one important thing. We know about destructuring, and if you have not studied about destructuring, you can go to the internet and find out about destructuring, which means we can, instead of writing these two lines, just write one line, which is, instead of setting the values in two lines, in the two lines, I'm going to write let and destructure the return value of the array, which is going to be count, which is the first value, and then set count. So this use state returns an array, and the first being the value of the state variable, and second being the function that is used to modify them. That's it. This is destructuring, and that is why we destructure the use state return value. Now that we understand it from the ground zero basics, we will be using destructuring from now on for state variables. Save it, and of course, our application is going to work perfectly fine again, increase and decrease. We can also add a function to reset. So we will write here function reset. We'll write set count and put the value as 0, and just add a button here where we'll reset the value. So reset and call the function which is going to be reset. Save it. And now let's try to see our output in the browser again. Yes. So I'm increasing, decreasing, and reset, which is 0. So this is how a state variable works. Now, one more important thing which we should understand is that we can have more than one state variable. I can also write one more value. Let us say this time let title of the application. So I'm going to again use the same format, title, that is a value of the state variable, set title, equal to use state. And this is basically the title of the application, which is going to be, let us say, our state-based counter. So now again, set title is going to modify the title, and title is the state value, which with the initial value as the value that we have passed to the use state function. I can now go again, print the title of the application. I'll write here h2 tag, write title, close it, save it, and we should be able to get down. Right? So the idea of this example is to tell you that you can have more than one state variable. You can have 3 state variables, 4 state variables, whatever suits your requirement, you can have those values. All right. So that is how we can use state variables. Now I'm going to tell you one more interesting thing about state variable, which is the mechanism, how it actually works. So what does that mean? Well, we understand that, state variables work in this way, but the question is how the UI is updated. And the answer is very, very simple. The answer is that whenever, I repeat, whenever we modify any state variable, our entire function reloads. So whenever you modify any state variable, maybe title or count, your entire function will be called again. We can verify this by just adding a console.log here in the top. Console.log, counter function called. Save it. Yeah. Save it. All right. Now let us reload the application and open the terminal console and clear it. And let's try to now, try to increase the state variable. And the moment I increase, the function is called. Now you might be thinking why it is called twice, it should be called once. Well, the reason is a performance issue that we are right now running React in development mode. And in development mode, whenever we change a state variable, it is called twice. Okay, we can reset this value also. We just need to go to index.js file and the strict mode, right? We can remove it. In the index.js, just remove the strict mode remove these two lines which I'm showing you, react.strict mode and this one. Save it. And now if I go back to my counter component and try to again reload my application and try to increase the value, it is only getting called once, right? So you can see that whenever I change any state variable, the entire function is called again, which refreshes my UI. So never forget, whenever we change a state variable, the entire function is called and the UI is refreshed. Now you might be thinking that this is not a very, optimized solution, but don't worry about that. React is very optimized, and even if the function is getting called again on any state variable change, React is smart enough to not slow down your application. Okay, so don't worry about that aspect. But remember this fundamental, that whenever we change a state variable, your entire function is called again. All right, so that is how we can, use a state and create our counter component. In the coming example, we will try to also understand more about forms now that we understand what is a state variable.